They called me the builder of dreams. I used to believe that. My buildings touched the clouds, glass towers, white stone, luxury balconies overlooking Istanbul's sprawl. They said my hands lifted the skyline. Now, they only dig through rubble. On the morning the earth moved, I was in my car, crossing the bridge. I felt it, the vibration, the slow growl that turned into screaming concrete. I turned on the radio, and for a moment I heard my own name mixed with death counts. Somewhere in that noise, the first floor of my career collapsed. Since then, I've walked through neighborhoods that used to bear my signature. Now, just dust, shoes, and silence. They say every architect leaves a legacy. I left graves with good lighting. This is my testimony, not as a designer of skylines, but as a survivor of what I built. My name is Kemal Yalçın, born in Adana, in southern Turkey, a place where dust, sun, and prayer shape a man. My father was a mason, his hands thick with lime and promise. My mother sold figs at the market, her faith stronger than the mosque walls. When I was 12, an earthquake hit near our town. I watched my father pull strangers from ruins, his arms bleeding, his back bent, whispering prayers under collapsing walls. That night I promised myself I'd build things that never fall. That's the irony, isn't it? Every vow begins as purity, until pride gets involved. I was methodical, disciplined, and idealistic. I studied architecture in Ankara on scholarship, obsessed with precision. Every column aligned with purpose, every line a silent prayer. I believed beauty could be moral. I believed a building could be a confession in concrete, something honest, enduring. But I also wanted to be seen, to rise above my father's dust, to prove that faith and ambition could coexist. When the praise began, awards, interviews, contracts, it didn't sound like temptation. It sounded like destiny. Inside, I was still the boy wanting his name etched into something that would last forever. Only, forever came sooner than I expected. They say every empire begins with a blueprint. Mine began with an unpaid invoice. After graduation, I returned to Istanbul, a city that never slept, always rebuilding itself. Every block was a confession, new towers rising where old ones fell. I joined Demirkan Construction, a firm with friends in every ministry and enemies in none. At first, I believed I was there to design beauty, but in the city's rhythm, beauty was just the wrapping. The core was speed and profit. We built fast, signed faster. Every week a new project. Residential blocks for the middle class, shopping centers for the rich. I became known for efficiency. My designs stood tall. My costs stayed low. Clients loved that. They said Kemal knows how to make concrete obey. When the company offered me a partnership, I told myself I'd earned it. I'd worked harder, slept less, prayed more. I didn't notice the signatures I was placing. Not just on paper, but on the moral cracks forming beneath. It started small. A subcontractor came to me one afternoon with a quiet smile and a heavy envelope. "Just to smooth the permit," he said. I laughed. He didn't. Inside, enough lira to cover my mother's hospital bills twice over. I told myself it was harmless. Everyone did it. Bureaucracy was slow. Money was grease. And besides, didn't my father once say, "A good builder finds a way"? That night I didn't sleep well. The next day I signed another approval. By the third time I slept fine. Every system has its lubricant. Mine was conscience, dissolved drop by drop. In Turkey, progress was sacred. We were told we were building a modern nation, glass by glass, beam by beam. The government praised us as patriots, men who turned dust into skyline. When my mother saw me on television cutting a ribbon beside a mayor, she cried. "I always knew you'd build something holy," she said. I wanted to tell her the steel was thinner than code allowed, that the inspectors had been helped to look elsewhere. But I just nodded and smiled for the camera. Ambition, I learned, is a polite word for hunger. My biggest project came in 2019, a 30-story residential complex in Izmir, backed by foreign investors and local officials. The deadline was brutal. The budget was a prayer on fire. When the head engineer, Ahmet, warned me the foundation needed extra reinforcement, I said, "Do it later, after the first phase. We'll adjust the calculations." He frowned. "Kemal, this isn't like plaster. Once it's poured—" "I know," I interrupted, smiling the way people do when lying politely. "We'll handle it. Trust me." Later that week, the investors arrived from Germany. They wanted results, not excuses. I showed them models, renderings, promises. I said words like sustainable, seismic resistant, modern Turkish innovation. Every word was a brick in a wall between truth and me. When they shook my hand, I felt proud and terrified. Success changes your breathing. It makes your chest tight with invisible weight. The nights grew longer, the whiskey glasses deeper. My wife Layla said I was drifting. "You used to sketch dreams," she said. "Now you just sign papers." I told her dreams don't pay contractors. She stopped asking questions after that. At work, I became a machine. Calm voice, firm tone, expensive suit. Inside, I was a man running down a slope, praying the ground would hold. My friends changed too. I no longer met architects who cared about form or philosophy. I met men who could make things happen. They laughed loud, drove German cars, and wore watches worth a year's salary. They called me Abi, brother, but their eyes said prophet. In that circle, guilt was bad for business. We joked about inspectors, toasted to deadlines beaten, and congratulated each other on creating jobs. At home, I avoided mirrors. My son once asked, "Baba, why do we have so many lights in our house?" I told him, "Because your father builds light." He smiled. I didn't. By 2020, we had 20 buildings under construction. Margins were thin. Material prices were rising. The investors threatened to pull out unless we delivered early. So I called the site foreman and said, "Use the cheaper rebar. It meets the minimum." He hesitated. "It's weaker." I replied, "So is the economy." That line haunted me later. At the time, it sounded clever, managerial. Now, it sounds like an epitaph. When Ahmet protested again, I told him to take a vacation. He resigned instead. I replaced him with someone more obedient. Every human sin needs a disguise. Mine wore numbers. I built spreadsheets like cathedrals of logic. Efficiency ratios, profit margins, deadlines met. Every column was a justification, every cell a shield. I convinced myself I was helping people, giving them homes, modern lives. Wasn't that worth a few adjustments? That's the trick of corruption. It never feels evil while you're winning. One evening, Layla found the invoices. Materials listed at half their actual grade. She said quietly, "People will live there, Kemal. Families, children." I said, "And they'll thank me for it." She didn't speak to me for a week. When she finally did, Her words were colder than any blueprint. Maybe you're not afraid of collapse, but I am. I wanted to tell her that collapse only happens to others, but even as I said it, I felt the tremor starting inside. The last day before construction finished, I stood on the roof of the Izmir project, watching the sunset burn behind cranes. The city looked eternal. Below me, men in helmets shouted, welded, carried, sweated, trusting the steel beneath them. And for a brief second, I felt like God, a creator made of contracts and cement. That feeling didn't last. It never does. Because somewhere beneath my feet, the earth was waiting, patient, ancient, ready to test every lie I'd buried inside the foundation. They say success has no smell. They're wrong. It smells like fresh concrete and perfume. It smells like leather seats, hot asphalt, and the faint metallic tang of money changing hands. For a while, I breathed it like oxygen. The Izmir project opened to applause. TV cameras, banners, the mayor shaking my hand. Turkey's modern vision, the newspaper said. I stood there smiling, the architect of progress, the savior of the skyline. My name, Kemal Yalçın, etched in steel at the building's base. People took selfies beside it. When I went home, Layla looked at the paper, then at me. She said, "You built a monument to yourself." I laughed. Maybe someone has to. She didn't laugh back. That night, the calls began. New investors, politicians, journalists. Everyone wanted a piece of my empire. I didn't sleep. I planned. Istanbul at night became my kingdom. The city lights stretched like veins across the Bosphorus. I learned which bars stayed open for the rich, which deals were made over raqqa instead of signatures. There was always noise, laughter, glasses clinking, soft music, the hum of flattery. I told stories about urban renewal, about a new generation of Turkish design. Every lie was wrapped in vision. In that world, honesty was provincial, charm was currency. Money gives you a strange confidence. It makes you believe earthquakes only happen to other people. I bought a new villa on the hills above Çeşme, glass walls overlooking the sea. I told my son, "This is what hard work brings." He nodded, eyes wide. At night, the waves sounded like applause. I stopped visiting construction sites. Too dusty, too loud. Instead, I sent assistants, demanded daily reports, and trusted the numbers. The irony still burns. I was the architect who no longer touched stone. There was one night I remember clearly, a gala for urban innovation at a hotel I had designed myself. Music, lights, champagne. A journalist asked, "What does legacy mean to you, Mr. Yalçın?" I said, "Legacy is the shadow of progress." Everyone clapped. I felt invincible. Later, on the balcony, a woman from the ministry whispered, "They say your buildings dance even in earthquakes." I smiled. "Then may they never stop dancing." She laughed. I kissed her. For a moment, the ground beneath us felt steady. Each success needed a bigger sin to sustain it. We began cutting deeper corners, faster builds, cheaper steel, recycled rebar from demolished structures. Every warning from engineers was handled. Every safety inspection became another dinner. Contracts flowed. So did silence. Inside, I told myself I wasn't stealing. I was optimizing. Everyone benefits, I'd say. Jobs, homes, economy. That line worked on everyone, even me. Then came a small tremor. Not a disaster, just a warning. A 4.2 magnitude quake in another province. On the news, I saw a building collapse. Not mine, not yet. But the image stayed, a child's toy in the dust, a mother's voice breaking. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Layla found me watching, silent. She asked, "Do you ever worry?" I said, "About what?" "About whether what you build can stand." I turned off the TV. "Everything stands," I said, "if it's built right." The silence that followed was longer than the tremor. When you lose your moral compass, you seek warmth in chaos. The woman from the ministry, her name was Elif, became my distraction. She liked danger, like me. We met in hotel rooms I'd designed, surrounded by my own reflected image, glass, steel, city lights. She once said, "You don't sleep much." I replied, "I build too much." She laughed, "Then build me something beautiful." I never did. She was there for power. I was there to forget the weight of it. Every sin felt lighter than the last. Then came the reports. Minor cracks in one of the Izmir towers, a hairline fracture on the parking foundation. Ahmet, the engineer who had quit, called me after seeing it in the paper. "Did you reinforce it after all?" he asked. I hesitated. "We met the code," he sighed. "You met the code, but did you meet your promise?" I hung up. Later, I looked through the blueprints, the missing beams, the substituted columns, all mine, each signature another scar. I told myself I'd fix it later, after the next project, after the next bonus. But later is the most dangerous word in construction. That night, I dreamt of my father. He stood in the ruins of a half-built house, calling my name. Every time I walked toward him, the walls crumbled. I shouted, "Baba, I built everything right." He said nothing, just picked up a single cracked brick, placed it in my hand, and whispered, "This one remembers you." I woke up sweating. My hand was clenched tight. For a second, I swore I could feel dust. Weeks before the earthquake, there were signs. Strange creaks in walls, reports of vibrations. We brushed them off. "Settling," we said. "Normal expansion." One Friday, during prayer at the office, I looked around the room. My staff bowed, murmuring verses. I couldn't move. I realized I hadn't prayed in months. Not really. I just bowed to my own reflection. That same day, the radio mentioned tectonic pressure building in the Aegean plate. I turned the volume down. "Not here," I said aloud. "Not mine," as if saying it could keep the ground still. On the night of the quake, I was at a dinner with investors. We were laughing, drinking, celebrating a new coastal project. Elif was there too, her perfume heavy, her eyes glinting. Someone raised a toast, "To foundations that never fail." The room erupted in applause. I smiled, but inside, something shifted. Maybe it was conscience. Maybe it was the earth warning me one last time. Later that night, as I drove home along the dark highway, the city lights shimmered in the distance. I thought of my father again, how he used to test the ground before laying the first stone. "Never trust silence," he'd say. "It hides movement." The air felt heavy. The radio crackled. Somewhere deep under the asphalt, the silence began to move. It happened at 4:17 a.m. I was driving through the Karsiyaka district, a highway overpass slicing through sleeping lights. The radio was low. Then the road began to hum. A deep vibration, like the city's lungs inhaling before screaming. I slowed. The hum turned into a growl. Then the horizon started to move. It didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like 1,000 doors slamming shut. Every building, every room, sealing at once. The bridge twisted. Streetlights flickered, bent, snapped. I tried to stop the car. The steering wheel bucked like a living thing. Somewhere behind me, I heard a sound I'll never forget. Concrete folding. Not breaking. Folding. Windows exploded. The sky filled with dust. The air was full of screams and glass. When the shaking stopped, silence came heavy as ash. I stepped out. The ground rippled beneath me, cracked, uneven, alive. Ahead, where the Izmir complex stood, there was only dust. A solid shape moments ago, now a gray cloud swallowing the dawn. My knees went weak. I started running. I don't remember the first bodies I saw, only the hands, sticking out of concrete like questions. People were shouting names, digging with bare fingers. Someone yelled, "Children! There are children!" I knew those voices. They were my residents, the people whose mortgages I'd approved, whose keys I'd handed over smiling. I saw a man holding his wife's shoe, a child's backpack half buried. I wanted to help, but I froze. All I could see were my blueprints in reverse, every floor plan unraveling, every signature turning to dust. A firefighter grabbed me. "Sir, move back. It's unstable." I couldn't move. I whispered, "I built this." He didn't hear. Or maybe he did, and didn't know what to say. For hours I stayed near the site. The air smelled of gas, blood, rain, and electricity. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters began to arrive. Microphones, cameras, flashbulbs cutting through gray. They said the quake was 7.2. Hundreds dead, thousands displaced. But the numbers didn't matter, because I recognized the faces. One of the towers had caved straight down, as if its bones were hollow. It was. I made it that way. When they pulled out a small boy, limp and covered in dust, I couldn't breathe. His t-shirt, a cartoon architect holding a blueprint. His mother screamed. Something inside me finally cracked. I vomited in the street. People thought I was sick from shock. They were right, but not from the quake. By afternoon, the news channels had found my name. Kemal Yalçın, chief architect of the collapsed towers. The footage played on loop. Me at ribbon cuttings, smiling, holding scissors, praising innovation. My phone exploded with calls, investors, lawyers, reporters. I turned it off. Then I threw it away.
At night, I hid in my car outside a mosque. I could still feel the ground moving, even though it wasn't. Ghost tremors. Every blink replayed a face. They said over 200 died in my project. I saw each of them. Every one. That night, I dreamt again. I was inside the building as it fell. Every floor passing like pages in a book I'd written. On the last floor, there was a voice. A child's voice. Baba said buildings don't fall. Then silence. I woke up screaming. The car windows fogged. I didn't know where I was anymore. Within a week, they arrested the site manager and the developer. Then they came for me. Charges. Criminal negligence resulting in death. I didn't resist. In the courtroom, cameras clicked like gunfire. The prosecutor read a list of names. The dead. Every name was a nail. When he finished, I said nothing. The judge asked if I had a defense. I said, only guilt. Prison was quieter than I expected. No machines, no phones. Just breathing, walls, and time. My cellmate was a fisherman from Hatay who'd lost everything. Wife, home, children, to the same quake. When he asked what I did, I lied. I said I was a contractor. He nodded slowly. Then you know the sea and the earth don't forgive shortcuts. Every night, I counted the seconds between the hum of fluorescent lights. That was my new clock. Not deadlines, not deals, just hums and silences. Months later, Layla came. She looked thinner, older. She didn't sit close. I said, "How's our son?" She said, "He asks if the ground can open again." I couldn't answer. She handed me a small envelope. Inside, a newspaper photo. It showed volunteers rebuilding the Izmir site into a memorial. The caption, "For those who lived where trust fell." Layla whispered, "They buried them in the courtyard, the one you designed." Then she left. That night, I prayed for the first time in years, not for forgiveness, but for silence. The days after blurred. The quake replayed behind my eyelids, slow motion, infinite. Sometimes I heard laughter in the walls, the sound of investors, engineers, mayors, all the voices that once called me genius. Now, they were echoes in concrete. One morning, the fisherman said, "You talk in your sleep." What do I say? "You keep saying, 'It was stable.'" He paused. "What was?" "Me," I said. "I thought I was." Years pass slowly when your legacy is buried. But something happens when you're forced to live among men who've lost more honestly than you. Their crimes were anger, hunger, need. Mine was pride. One afternoon, there was another tremor, small, far away. The whole prison held its breath. When it stopped, everyone exhaled, muttering prayers. I didn't. I just whispered, still standing. But inside, I wasn't. The day I was released, the warden handed back my watch, my pen, and a folded copy of my original blueprint. The title block still said, "Yalçın Residences, built to last." I stared at it until the ink blurred. Then I walked out, not as an architect, not as a man, just a survivor, buried above ground. I was released after 6 years, 6 years of silence, prayer, and dust. When I walked out of the prison gates, the light felt artificial, like it didn't belong to me anymore. My hands shook, as if they still held a pen, waiting to sign something that would change lives. But there were no papers left to sign, only consequences. Istanbul had changed. New towers rose where old ones had fallen. My name had vanished from every plaque, every office, every drawing. It was as if the city had erased me with the same precision I once demanded from blueprints. I rented a small room near the docks. Every night I watched cranes lift steel into the sky, their movements mechanical, precise, inhuman. I thought of all the cranes I'd commanded once, each one now building a future without me. One evening, I heard a small tremor, a distant rattle in the glass. People on the street flinched, then returned to their business. I didn't. For me, every vibration was a voice. A week later, I took a bus to Izmir. The driver didn't know who I was. No one did anymore. The city looked the same, but quieter. Near the old project site, there was a memorial park now. Marble slabs where the towers once stood. Names engraved in alphabetical order. Sunlight tracing them like wounds. I walked slowly, touching each letter. Some I remembered. Some I'd only seen on paper. A child's name stopped me. The boy with the cartoon architect on his shirt. Beside it, a photograph of him smiling, holding a small model of a house. I knelt. The earth smelled of grass and rain, not cement. I whispered, "I built you a home that couldn't hold." And for the first time, I cried. Not the loud, cinematic kind, the quiet kind that burns behind the eyes, the kind that rebuilds something small inside. A woman approached, mid-40s, pale scarf, thin voice. She looked at me for a long time. "You're him," she said. I nodded. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just said, "My sister died here. My nephew, too. We used to live on the 12th floor." I wanted to fall at her feet, to beg, to explain, but she held up her hand. "No words," she whispered. "Just listen." We stood in silence. The wind blew between the memorial stones, whistling like the ghost of concrete. After a moment, she said, "I hate what you did, but I also hate how many others still build like you did. Maybe you can teach them not to." Then she walked away. That sentence followed me home, not as condemnation, but as direction. I found work at a local technical school, not as an architect, no license, no company would touch me, but as a drafting instructor. Most of my students were young men who dreamed of towers, awards, and investors, the way I once did. On the first day, I drew a line on the board. Then I erased half of it. "Every design," I said, "is a moral choice disguised as geometry." They looked at me blankly. So I told them the story. Not my name, not the city, but the truth. How one missing bean can destroy a generation. How one signature can carry ghosts.
Some of them looked away. Others listened too closely. One boy asked, "If you could rebuild it, would you?" I said, "No. I'd build less, but build right." That night, I went to a small seaside mosque, the same one my father used to take me to when I was young. The imam didn't recognize me, or maybe he did and chose mercy. I sat in the back, head bowed. When the call to prayer ended, I stayed behind. I whispered to the empty hall, "God, I built with pride, not faith. I used your earth as currency. I made progress my prayer." Then I stopped. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't think I deserved it. I just sat there until dawn, until the muezzin's voice returned, like a second heartbeat. That morning, I realized confession isn't about words. It's about stillness. It's about not defending the ruin. A year later, I wrote a letter to the victims' families. Not to apologize, apologies are cheap, but to acknowledge. I wrote, "I can't rebuild what I destroyed. I can't unsign the papers or unpour the concrete, but I can live the rest of my life teaching others to respect what stands beneath us, the ground, the people, the silence." If any of you ever see a building with my name again, know that it stands because of you, not me. I never sent the letters. I buried them at the memorial site instead. Years have passed since then. I still wake up when the earth trembles, even if it's just the wind. I still hear the sound of folding concrete in my sleep, but something's changed. When I walk past construction sites now, I see not ambition, but responsibility. Men in hard hats, shouting, sweating, each one balancing human lives on bolts and beams. Sometimes I whisper to them as I pass, "Build slow." They never hear me, but maybe that's not the point. In the distance, I can see a new skyline rising. Glass towers, cranes, light reflecting off metal. They no longer bear my signature. But maybe, in a way, that's redemption. Because not everything built to last needs your name on it. Some things just need to stand, quietly. The older I get, the more the world sounds like breathing. Construction cranes creaking, oceans sighing, people whispering their daily prayers. For years I thought I'd been cursed to hear echoes of collapse. Now I know it's the sound of life rebuilding itself, one quiet act at a time. It's been 10 years since the quake. I live in a small house by the Aegean coast, built with my own hands. Just one floor, no pillars pretending to reach heaven. The walls are thick, the roof simple, the ground tested and true. Every morning I make tea and sit by the window, watching fishermen cast nets into the gray water. Sometimes the earth hums, faint and steady, and I let it. I've learned that the world moves whether we want it to or not. Our task is only to build what can bend without breaking. Once a month, I take the bus to the technical school. I'm still Kemal Hoca to the new students, a title that once meant authority, now humility. They don't know my past. They only know the lessons I repeat until my voice cracks. Every beam is a promise. Every wall carries weight. Every corner you cut takes a soul with it. Sometimes I show them old photos, buildings half finished, workers smiling. Then I ask, which of these stood the longest? They guess the tallest ones. They're wrong. The answer is always the ones built with patience. They laugh, but a few of them write it down. Those few give me hope. My son visits once a year now. He's grown, working as an urban planner in Ankara. He designs public parks, open spaces, no walls, no ceilings. When he first told me that, I smiled. Maybe you're building what I couldn't, I said. He shrugged. Maybe I'm just afraid of roofs. We both laughed. Before he leaves, he always walks around my small house, running his hand over the walls. Once he said quietly, "It's strange. I trust this one." I wanted to tell him, that's because it was built with guilt and prayer, the strongest mix I know. But I just said, so do I. Every year on the anniversary, I return to Izmir. I bring flowers, not to atone, but to remember. The memorial has changed. Children play there now. Families picnic among the stones. That's how it should be, the living reclaiming the ground of the dead. One time, I saw a little boy tracing the engraved names with his finger. He asked his mother, "Who were they?" She said, "People who taught us to build stronger." I wanted to kneel right there to thank her, but I just walked past, eyes full, heart steady. Not long ago, Ahmet, the engineer who'd quit before the disaster, came to see me. He brought tea and silence, both strong. After a while, he said, "They're teaching your case in the universities now. Ethics modules, risk management. Your name comes up often." I smiled faintly. "I hope it's a warning, not a legend." He nodded. "It is. But sometimes, the right warnings save more lives than the right buildings." We drank in silence after that. The sea outside was calm. For once, so were we. At night, I still dream of concrete. But it no longer folds. It settles, slowly, like a body finding peace. Sometimes I dream of my father again. This time he's sitting by a finished house, wiping sweat from his brow. He looks at me and says, "Finally, you built something that breathes." Then he vanishes into the morning light. I wake up to the sound of the waves against the shore. It sounds like forgiveness. Not the loud, holy kind, the quiet kind that lets you live. People often say redemption is about forgiveness. I don't think so. Forgiveness is for others. Redemption is learning to stay alive inside your own ruins. Every time I walk past a construction site, I stop to listen. The clang of metal, the heartbeat of drills, the murmur of workers. Each sound reminds me that creation is a fragile form of prayer, one that demands humility more than pride. I once built to be remembered. Now, I build so others can forget me, so the ground can rest, so the walls can hold. so the names can stop falling. One evening, as the sun bleeds orange across the Aegean, I take a slow walk to the shore. The air smells of salt and steel. Children are playing nearby, building sandcastles, shouting, laughing. I watch as a small wave crashes and erases one of their towers. The boy laughs, starts again. He doesn't curse, he just rebuilds. I smile. He already knows what took me half a life to learn, that everything falls eventually. But how we rebuild decides who we become. The tide rises. The light fades. I whisper one last line to the sea, as if it can carry it back to the ruins I left behind. I built graves with good lighting. Now I build shadows that shelter life, and for the first time in years, the ground beneath my feet feels steady.